My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32, and for a whole year my family planned my sister's wedding down to every last detail. They chose the flowers, the music, even the bridesmaids, but never once included me. I wasn't forgotten. I was written out. At dinners they talked about color schemes while pretending I wasn't at the table. On my phone I found a group chat called Team Wedding 2023 that never had my name. Then, one night I walked to my car and saw a child seat already strapped in the back like my invitation was to babysit, not to belong. Still, I showed up on the day they wanted me gone. And what happened inside that hall didn't just shake my family's image of perfection, it changed everything. Stay with me, because the moment the truth slipped onto that screen, there was no going back. I left the office later than I wanted. That Thursday evening, the glow of my computer screen still buzzing in my head as I walked out into the warm Austin air. It was early June, the kind of weather where the sun refused to set and the pavement radiated heat long after daylight had begun to fade. My coworkers were heading out for drinks, but I had the weekly dinner at my parents' house to get to. It had been our family's routine for years, one of those traditions that kept rolling on whether I was in the mood for it or not. The drive across the city was familiar, almost too familiar. I passed South Congress, the blinking crosswalk at South Lamar, the same gas station I used to stop at when I was 19 and rushing home from class. Everything about the route felt like muscle memory. I thought about bringing a dessert, something small to contribute, but decided against it. Lately it seemed like no matter what I brought, no one really noticed. When I pulled into my parents' driveway in Round Rock, the wind chimes clinked against each other and the porch swing creaked in the same rhythm it had for 20 years. I stood there for a second, hand on my keys, preparing myself. Walking inside was like stepping into a movie I had seen too many times. The television buzzed from the living room where my dad sat in his recliner, eyes split between the baseball game and whoever walked in. The kitchen smelled like fried chicken and onions. My mom's voice bounced from room to room, cheerful but distracted, calling out instructions to whoever would listen. "Hey honey, we started early," she said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before moving back toward the stove. I placed the bottle of wine I'd picked up on the counter, though I doubted anyone would remember I brought it. The dining table was already crowded. Megan, my older sister, sat near the center with her phone angled toward her lap, fingers moving quickly. Rachel, my other sister, was spoon-feeding one of her toddlers while scrolling her own screen with her free hand. Megan's daughter Emily was at the end of the table, kicking her legs and humming to herself. The noise was steady and overlapping, each voice fighting to be heard over another. I slid into an empty seat near the edge. "How was everyone's week?" I asked, trying to blend into the conversation. The answers came quickly. "Busy. Crazy week. You know how it is." My dad didn't look up from the game, just grunted something about the Rangers blowing another lead. When it was my turn, I mentioned a project at work, how my team at Austin Tech had managed to finish a milestone 3 months ahead of schedule. No one asked follow-up questions, no one even looked up. So I leaned into the role I always played, the listener, the cheerleader. I told Rachel she was patient with the kids, complimented Mom's cooking, laughed at Emily's half-formed sentences. Halfway through the meal, the conversation shifted. Megan leaned toward my mom, her voice low but caring enough for me to catch pieces. Bridesmaids' dresses, floral arrangements, rehearsal, dinner seating. Rachel chimed in about the cake tasting. My mom tapped her phone to double-check the catering schedule. Their voices were animated, full of energy. I forced myself to keep eating, though my stomach had tightened. The words "wedding season" floated around the table like confetti, landing everywhere but on me. No one asked if I was excited, no one mentioned what role I might play. My eyes drifted to Megan's phone when she set it on the table to help Emily with her juice box. The screen was still lit, the top of a group chat visible. Team Wedding 2023. The name flashed in a burst before the screen dimmed again. I felt my throat go dry. I took a sip of water, forcing myself not to stare. Megan picked up her phone again, thumbs moving fast, laughing at whatever message came through. Rachel's phone buzzed at the same time, and she giggled, showing my mom something on her screen. Team Wedding 2023. A whole conversation, a whole plan happening without me. I swallowed hard, tried to smile, nodded at something my dad said about the game, though I hadn't been listening. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I stacked my plate, offered to help clear the table, but my mom waved me off. "You've had a long day, sweetie. Go home and rest." The drive back felt heavier than the drive there. The streets were dark now, headlights glowing in long streaks across the highway. When I pulled into my apartment complex, the cicadas buzzed so loud it almost drowned out my thoughts. I killed the engine, sat there for a moment staring at the glow of my phone on the passenger seat. I didn't open it. I didn't want to see the silence in the family thread waiting only for emergencies. I got out, grabbed my purse, and walked toward the stairwell. For some reason, I stopped halfway and turned back to the car. A tug in my chest, like I had forgotten something. I opened the back door. That was when I saw it. A toddler car seat strapped in tight, the harness neatly buckled. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't mine. I had never owned one. I stood there in the quiet parking lot, the cicadas humming like a soundtrack I never asked for. My hand brushed the plastic buckle and the reality hit me all at once. They hadn't forgotten me. They had already assigned me. Babysitter, caretaker, the reliable one. Not a guest, not family to celebrate, just someone to keep things running smoothly while they posed for pictures and clinked glasses. I closed the door softly and leaned against the car, staring up at the night sky. The air was thick, the heat still rising from the pavement. My chest felt tight, but not from surprise. From confirmation. I was never meant to be at that wedding. I was meant to stay behind, invisible, useful only when needed. I walked back to my apartment without turning around again. The door shut behind me, but the weight of that empty car seat followed me inside louder than anything my family had said at dinner. I dropped my keys onto the counter and stood in the quiet of my apartment, the hum of the fridge filling the silence I had carried in from the parking lot. The car seat still pressed against my mind, an image I could not erase. I sat on the edge of my couch, elbows resting on my knees, and let the weight of memory crawl in, memories I usually shoved aside when life was too busy to think about them. I remembered being 9 years old, lying in bed with a fever so strong I could barely lift my head. I had called out for my mom, hoping she would bring me soup or sit with me until I fell asleep. Instead, I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood, her voice bright and cheerful as she told Megan to grab her coat. They were heading out to a recital, something Rachel had begged to attend. My mother peeked into my room for half a second, whispered that she would be back later, and disappeared with my sisters trailing behind her. I had spent that night sweating through my sheets, listening to the sound of the garage door closing, the house growing still around me. No one checked in until the next morning. It was always like that. I was never the priority, only the afterthought. Another memory pressed forward, one I could still feel in my chest. Christmas morning, maybe when I was 15. I had saved for weeks, babysitting for neighbors and skipping lunch at school to stretch every dollar. I wanted to get everyone something thoughtful. For my dad, I found a leather wallet engraved with his initials. For Rachel, I bought a set of pastel markers because she loved doodling. For Megan, I picked out a silver charm bracelet with a little star, something I imagined she would wear and remember me by. I wrapped each gift carefully, taping the edges so cleanly you would think a store clerk had done it. When it was my turn to open presents, there was only one card waiting for me under the tree. It was signed from all of them. Inside was a $20 gift card to a department store, the same handwriting from my mother with no message attached. I smiled and said thank you because that was what I was supposed to do. But I felt it then, the unmistakable truth that my thoughtfulness would never be returned. The memories faded as I blinked back into the present, sitting alone with the hum of the fridge and the tightness in my chest. It was no wonder that car seat felt like a verdict. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about every single moment I had been reminded that I was there to serve, not to belong. The next Sunday dinner came quickly. I almost didn't go, but skipping would have sparked questions I wasn't ready to answer. I drove back to Round Rock, telling myself to stay calm, to keep my face neutral. When I walked into the house, the kitchen table was covered in papers, not the usual clutter of grocery lists and bills, but stacks of glossy printouts. Megan was hunched over them, highlighter in hand, her lips moving as she whispered seating arrangements. I paused in the doorway, my mom stirring something on the stove, Rachel bouncing her toddler on her hip. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stepped closer. The chart was neat, organized by table numbers with names printed in soft cursive. I scanned them quickly, recognizing cousins, family, friends, old neighbors. Table after table filled with names that belonged. My name wasn't there. I checked again, slower this time, starting from the head table where Megan and her fiancé Adam would sit, moving outward through family circles and friends from college. Still nothing. The only Bennett that appeared consistently was Megan, sometimes paired with Adam's family or surrounded by cousins she barely spoke to anymore. I felt a flicker of heat in my chest, but I bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep my face still. Megan didn't notice me staring. She circled a name, scribbled something, and passed the page to my mom. "Looks good," Mom said, glancing at the chart with a smile. "We just need to finalize the kids' table." I turned to leave to put some distance between myself and the proof on that paper, but my mom's voice stopped me. She spoke casually, as if she were asking about groceries or laundry. "Claire, you'll help keep an eye on the little ones during the ceremony, right?" It wasn't a question, it was a placement. Like the car seat. Like the empty Christmas card. Like every moment of being left behind. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. My first instinct was to argue, to ask why I wasn't listed anywhere, why I was once again given a role that stripped me of any dignity. But the room was too warm, and all eyes would have turned to me, waiting for me to be the problem. So I nodded. Or maybe I didn't even nod. Maybe I just stayed silent long enough for her to assume agreement. Rachel shifted her toddler from one hip to the other and smiled at me, a distracted, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Megan scribbled something else on her chart, already back in her world of linen colors and bouquet choices. My father called from the living room, asking when dinner would be ready. The conversation moved on as if nothing had been said, but I stood there frozen with the sound of my mother's request echoing in my head. Help with the little ones. No mention of being a guest. No mention of sharing in the joy, just a quiet assignment delivered like it was the most natural thing in the world. I wanted to scream, to slam the papers on the floor and demand an explanation. Instead, I forced my lips into a thin smile and walked toward the sink, rinsing a plate just to keep my hands busy. The chatter around me blurred, words blending into a hum I could no longer follow. All I could see was that chart, every name neatly in place except mine. All I could hear was my mother's gentle voice rapping an order in soft edges. I finished the evening in silence, chewing food I could barely taste, answering questions with one-word replies. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and chose not to care. When it was finally time to leave, I excused myself with a polite smile, hugging Rachel quickly and waving at Megan, who barely looked up from her phone. My mom kissed my cheek and told me to drive safe. The night air outside was cooler than it had been in weeks, a breeze sweeping through the trees. I walked to my car slowly, each step heavy with the knowledge that this was not just about one wedding. This was about the pattern of a lifetime, one that no one else seemed to see but me. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, and let the silence press in until I could hardly breathe. They had drawn the map of the celebration, and I was nowhere on it. And yet, I was still expected to show up invisible and hold everything together. The next weekend, I walked into my parents' house, and the first thing I saw was Rachel twirling in front of the hallway mirror, a long garment bag unzipped halfway down. The soft blush fabric spilled out as she pressed it against her body, her smile wide and unashamed. Mom clapped her hands together, eyes lighting up. "That's beautiful, Rachel. The color suits you so well." Rachel tossed her hair back, still admiring her reflection. "I know, right? It just came in yesterday." Megan picked out the shade. "All the bridesmaids are wearing this one." I froze in the doorway, my hand still holding my car keys. Bridesmaids. The word landed like a stone in my chest. Rachel wasn't just showing off a new dress. She was showing off her place in a lineup I hadn't even been considered for. I stepped closer, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "All the bridesmaids." Rachel glanced at me, her smile twitching into something sharper. "Yeah. Megan's college friends, a couple cousins, me of course. Even Jenna from Dad's side is flying in." "Can you believe?" she agreed. Jenna. A cousin we hadn't seen in almost 10 years, living across the country. Somehow she belonged more than I did. I tried to mask the sting, but Rachel's eyes narrowed as if she saw it anyway. She let out a little laugh. "Claire, you wouldn't look right in blush pink. Too washed out on you. Honestly, you'd hate the photos." My mom gave a polite chuckle, not disagreeing, just smoothing it over like always. Rachel zipped the garment bag back up, swinging it over her shoulder with a proud tilt of her chin. I stood there silent, letting their words echo in my head. Bridesmaid. Cousins. College friends. Everyone but me. The truth was, I had been there when Megan first met Ethan. She was nervous, stumbling over her words at a barbecue one summer in Austin. I was the one who told her she looked fine, that she just needed to breathe and laugh at his jokes. I was the one who stayed up with her the night she couldn't decide what to wear on their second date, pulling dresses from her closet until she settled on the blue one. I had listened when she called me in tears after their first fight, reminding her that if she wanted the relationship to work, she had to say how she felt instead of slamming doors. I was part of the foundation of this relationship, even if no one else remembered. And now, standing in that house filled with plans and fabrics and laughter, I realized my role had been quietly erased. Dinner that night was noisy, everyone crowded around the table, the air filled with overlapping voices. Megan was describing the rehearsal dinner venue. Rachel was already debating hairstyles. My mom kept circling back to seating arrangements. It was as if a current of excitement flowed through the house and I wasn't wired into it. I excused myself after pushing food around my plate, sliding open the glass door that led to the back patio. The warm evening air wrapped around me, cicadas buzzing in the distance. I leaned against the railing, looking out over the yard where we used to play tag as kids, where I once fell and scraped my knee so badly I cried until Dad carried me inside. From the other side of the door, their voices carried easily. Megan laughing, Rachel teasing, Mom's tone brisk and focused. Words floated out to me like fragments of a life I didn't belong to. Bouquet colors. Guest list confirmations. Hotel blocks. I was standing not 10 feet away, but they spoke like I was invisible. Like my presence was only useful when needed, otherwise irrelevant. I gripped the wooden railing until my knuckles ached, staring at the patchy grass below. It was easier than looking back into the glow of the dining room, easier than letting them see how much it hurt. I stayed out there until the air cooled and the chatter inside softened into a hum, until I could breathe again without feeling the weight of that garment bag or the sting of Rachel's laugh. Only then did I push the door open and step back inside, my face composed, my silence intact. The following morning, I opened my work laptop with a mug of coffee in hand, ready to skim through emails before heading into the office. Most were the usual updates from clients and project managers, but one subject line froze me in place. Contribution to wedding fund. It was from Rachel. I clicked it open, my pulse already quickening. The message was short and efficient, written as if it were a group memo. Each of us needs to chip in $200 toward the wedding fund so we can cover final vendor payments. Thanks in advance. Love, Rachel. I read it again, slower this time, making sure I had not imagined it. $1,200. Toward a wedding I was not invited to attend. Toward a day where my name had been deliberately left off the seating chart. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, the coffee cooling in my hands. There was a numb disbelief spreading across me, followed by the sharp burn of anger in my throat. It was not enough that I was being treated like a babysitter, not enough that Rachel mocked me over dresses and Megan ignored me in her plans. Now they expected me to help pay for it. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. I could already hear Rachel's tone in my head, casual, dismissive. It is family, Claire. Everyone contributes. As if my exclusion was irrelevant, as if money was the only thing I was worth. Before I could talk myself into silence again, I hit forward and typed Renee's name into the address bar. Renee Collins had been my friend since grad school and was now one of the top attorneys at the firm where I worked. She was sharp, unshakable, and the one person I knew would not laugh off my frustration. Her reply came less than 15 minutes later, short but firm. You are under no obligation to contribute to costs for an event you are not attending. Do not let them pressure you. If necessary, I will respond directly. I exhaled, feeling the tightness in my chest ease a little. Knowing Renee was in my corner mattered more than I could put into words. She had been there through my breakups, my career changes, and now apparently she was going to be there through my family's wedding circus. Still, my fingers hovered over the keyboard debating. Ignoring Rachel's email would only bring more messages, more guilt-tripping. I could already imagine Mom calling voice sugary on the surface guilt-laced beneath. If I stayed silent, the pressure would grow. So I started typing careful and measured. Thank you for including me, Rachel. I am not on the guest list for the wedding, so I will not be contributing to the shared expenses. I wish you all the best in final preparations. Then I added one more detail. I copied Renee into the thread. The satisfaction was quiet but deep, a small flame inside me as I clicked send. It took less than an hour for Rachel to respond. Her tone was sharper this time, the words clattering against the screen. Of course you are still part of the family. Everyone else is contributing. Why are you making this difficult? Renee replied before I even had to. Rachel, please refrain from directing financial obligations at Claire. She is not a bridesmaid, nor has she been invited to the event. Legally and personally, she owes nothing. This matter is closed. I stared at the screen, half expecting Rachel to keep pushing, but her inbox stayed quiet. For once, my sister had no quick comeback, no sly dig to twist the knife. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence soak in. It was not a victory in the grand sense, but it was something. A line had been drawn, and for the first time in weeks, I was not the only one defending it. When I left for work, the morning air was bright and hot, cicadas already buzzing in the trees. I carried my laptop bag to the car, still replaying Renee's words in my head. This matter is closed. At the office, she pulled me aside between meetings, her hand light on my arm. If they push again, Claire, let me know. Family or not, they cannot bully you into paying for something you are deliberately excluded from. I nodded, grateful but also uneasy. I knew my family well enough to understand that silence never lasted long. They would find another angle, another way to remind me that I was disposable to them, except when it suited their needs. But at least now I had proof that someone saw what was happening. Someone believed me. That night, I sat on my couch with the lights low, scrolling through my phone. Megan's wedding countdown was plastered across social media, photos of floral centerpieces and manicured rehearsal dinners. Rachel posted selfies with the caption, "Bridesmaid duties never end," her smile wide, her eyes smug. And I sat there quiet, my laptop still open on the coffee table, Renee's email glowing in the background like a small shield. For once, I had not stayed silent. For once, I had answered back. That night, I sat on the edge of my couch, laptop balanced against my knees, trying to pretend I could focus on work emails. The truth was, my mind was still buzzing from the exchange with Rachel earlier. My heart carried a strange mix of dread and pride, like I had stepped across a line I could never retreat from. I closed the laptop with a snap and reached for my phone, needing the distraction. The first thing that appeared on my feed was Megan's face. The photo was so glossy it looked like an ad. She stood in front of a wall of white tulle, her veil draped perfectly, the kind of shot that boutiques beg brides to share. The caption read, "First fitting at Bella's bridal. Feeling blessed." She had tagged nearly everyone in the family, even distant cousins from New Jersey and a neighbor we grew up next to. My name was missing. My thumb froze mid-scroll. It was not just that I was left out, it was the smug completeness of the picture. A chorus of comments rolled beneath it. Patricia wrote, "Our beautiful girl." Rachel added, "Can't believe it's happening so soon." Aunt Lisa chimed in, "Family all together again. Family all together." The words glared at me, mocking in their finality. I stared until the screen blurred. This wasn't private neglect anymore, this was public erasure. They were shaping an image of a family that didn't include me, and the whole world was invited to see it. I set the phone down hard on the coffee table. My pulse was racing, my mouth dry. I tried pacing the room, but the anger came with me, clinging to my skin. Every time I blinked, I saw the smiling cascade of comments, the hearts and flower emojis, the assumption that I wasn't part of us. When the notification dinged, I almost ignored it. My hands were still trembling when I picked the phone back up. It was a message request. I opened it cautiously, bracing for another sting. It was from Blake. Blake, my cousin, who had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, a camera slung around his neck while everyone else grabbed plates of food. He was only 2 years younger than me, but we had never been close. He moved out to Denver after college, chasing light and music festivals with his lens. He hardly ever weighed in on family drama. His first words stopped me cold. "I saw that post. It's not right, Claire. They're pretending you're not there." I blinked at the screen. My throat tightened as if I had swallowed glass. I typed back before I could second-guess myself. "Thank you for saying that." I thought I was losing my mind. His reply came fast. "You're not crazy. I've watched them sideline you since we were kids. But this, posting it for everyone to see, that's brutal." I leaned back against the couch, pressing the phone against my chest for a second. My eyes burned, but I didn't let the tears fall. I wasn't used to being believed, especially not by someone inside the family. We kept messaging, our words tumbling out like a dam had cracked. He told me Megan and Rachel had asked him to shoot behind-the-scenes photos at the wedding in exchange for exposure on social media. When he refused and mentioned his rate, they ghosted him. That made me laugh out loud, sharp and bitter, the sound bouncing off the walls of my apartment. "So they wanted free labor," I wrote back. "No surprise." "Exactly," he said. "You deserve better, Claire. Don't let them use you." I stared at those words. Simple, almost casual. But they landed like a lifeline. After the conversation wound down, I sat in the dark for a long time, replaying it in my head. For once, someone else saw what I saw. Someone else named it. That alone shifted the ground under my feet. The next morning, I poured coffee and braced myself before opening Facebook again. Megan had added new photos overnight, this time with Patricia and Rachel flanking her holding champagne flutes. The caption read, "Cheers to forever." Tagged again were everyone but me. The comments were worse than before. Uncle Dan wrote, "So glad the whole Bennett family will be together to celebrate." A former neighbor added, "It's wonderful to see families supporting each other." Each line was a knife twisting. I imagined people from high school seeing it, coworkers stumbling across it, all believing I had simply drifted away unwanted. The urge to comment pulsed in my fingertips. But Blake's words echoed back. "Don't let them use you." I forced myself to close the app. Instead, I opened my email. A new message from HR about a leadership workshop sat unread. I clicked it open and stared at the neat corporate phrases. Growth opportunities. Team synergy. None of it could shake the heaviness pressing down on me. By lunchtime, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Blake. "Hey, are you okay?" I typed slowly. "Trying to be. It hurts more than I want to admit." He replied, "That's normal. They've been cruel. But listen, you're not alone in this. I'm with you." Those 4 words settled into me like warm weight. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed to hear them. That evening, instead of scrolling endlessly, I opened my own photo folders. Shots from my last trip to Portland, snapshots of the city skyline, candid images of myself that no one had ever seen. I lingered on one in particular, taken by a coworker during a company retreat. I was laughing mid-sentence, sunlight catching in my hair. I looked alive. I looked like someone who belonged somewhere. I didn't post it. Not yet, but I saved it to a separate folder labeled Keep. Later, lying in bed, I thought about how my family had erased me online piece by piece until the absence felt real. But Blake's voice in my messages reminded me of something else. A different truth, quieter but stronger. I wasn't gone. The glow of my phone dimmed as I placed it face down on the nightstand. In the silence of my apartment, I let myself breathe for the first time that day. I had been humiliated in public, but I had also found a sliver of solidarity. It was small, but it was enough to hold on to, enough to remind me that I wasn't completely erased. I woke the next morning with the kind of heaviness that makes you want to pull the covers over your head and stay hidden, but instead I opened my laptop and sent an email to my manager requesting 3 days of vacation time. I did not bother with an explanation. A few minutes later, the approval came back quick and unbothered, and I felt the first small thread of freedom loosen around my chest. By noon, I had packed a small duffel, tossed it in the trunk of my car, and pointed myself south toward the hill country. The city skyline of Austin faded behind me as the roads opened up into stretches of oak trees and limestone hills. The further I drove, the lighter I felt, as if every mile put more distance between me and the suffocating chatter of wedding preparations. 2 hours later, I pulled into Wimberly. The little cabin I had rented sat tucked among cedar trees, its porch facing a slope that spilled into a dry creek bed. It smelled faintly of pine and wildflowers, and the silence pressed down like a blanket, steady and comforting. No buzzing notifications, no raised voices, no Rachel's sharp laugh, no Megan's curated captions. Just quiet. Inside the cabin was simple. A queen bed with a handmade quilt, shelves lined with novels worn from use, and a tiny kitchen with a French press sitting neatly on the counter. I set my bag down, opened the windows, and let the air roll in. The only sound was cicadas humming and the faint rustle of leaves outside. That first evening, I brewed coffee strong enough to jolt through my bones, curled up on the porch with a book, and watched the sunset paint the sky in pink and orange streaks. The peace of it was almost disorienting. I had grown so used to bracing myself for the next slight, the next demand, that my body did not know how to handle calm. The second day, I wandered the property with my camera. I captured the way dew clung to spiderwebs, the way sunlight broke through branches, the way the creek bed curved in soft shadows. Every photo felt like reclaiming something small, a piece of attention that belonged only to me. At night, I cooked pasta in the little kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and let music drift from my phone speakers. I caught myself humming along, something I had not done in months. But peace has a way of stirring memories too. On the third morning, while sipping coffee and watching a pair of deer step gingerly through the trees, my mind pulled me back to 3 years earlier. I had been weeks away from a trip to New York, my first in years. Tickets bought, hotel booked, itinerary printed and taped to my fridge. Then Rachel called, breathless and dramatic, asking me to watch her kids because she and her husband had a last-minute opportunity to travel. I had canceled everything, eating the cost, convincing myself it was the right thing to do for family. The bitterness of that memory clung to me more sharply than the coffee. I realized with a start that not once had anyone in my family apologized for it. They had simply expected me to fold, and I had. I looked out at the deer again, now bounding away into the brush, and felt a decision harden in me. I would not fold this time. I would not answer the phone when the inevitable call came. I would not step back into the swirl of tool and obligation. When my phone buzzed an hour later with Patricia's name flashing across the screen, I let it ring until it stopped. I spent the rest of the day stretched on the porch, the sun warming my skin, my book open in my lap but unread. My mind kept circling one truth. I had given up so many pieces of myself for them, and still they had erased me. Now, finally, I had to choose myself. As evening fell, the sky turned velvet and the stars blinked awake. I wrapped myself in the quilt from the bed and sat outside until the chill bit through. The quiet was no longer strange. It felt earned. When I finally crawled under the covers that night, I did not check my phone. I did not brace for another jab or another reminder of my absence. I closed my eyes, knowing that for the first time in a long time I had set a boundary I would not step back from. The cabin was still, and the world outside hushed. My last thought before sleep was simple, steady, and resolute. I was not going back. The morning light in the hill country was softer than I was used to, a pale gold that crept through the curtains and coaxed me awake before my alarm. I stretched, listening to the quiet. No car horns, no voices, no family chatter bouncing off restaurant walls, just stillness. For a few seconds, I allowed myself to feel what it was like to exist without being judged, measured, or pushed aside. Out of habit, my hand reached for my phone on the nightstand. I told myself I would only check the time, but the screen lit up with a swarm of notifications. At the top sat a new group chat that hadn't been there before. The title was "Impossible to Miss Team Wedding 2023. My stomach tightened. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. I tapped it open, and the messages poured across the screen, a stream of excitement that had started while I was asleep. Megan was asking if the bridesmaids had confirmed their fittings. Rachel was listing bakery options for the rehearsal dinner. Patricia was giving instructions about who would pick up out-of-town relatives from the airport. The thread was buzzing, filled with emojis, exclamation points, and little bursts of digital joy. It was like watching a party through glass. I could see it, but I was not part of it. I scrolled further back. The group had apparently been renamed only yesterday. Before that, it was just the family chat, the one we'd had for years. Now it was Team Wedding 2023, a neat dividing line between what belonged to them and what didn't. I was technically still in the group, but it was as if I had been erased while standing in the room. Not once did my name appear in any of the plans. Rachel mentioned ordering extra champagne flutes for the bridal suite. Patricia reminded Megan to bring comfortable shoes for the rehearsal dinner. Even Ethan had chimed in with a photo of cufflinks he was considering. The cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months were suddenly active, throwing in heart emojis and jokes. I scrolled until my thumb ached, hoping foolishly that somewhere my name might slip in. It didn't. Not a single mention. A memory flickered sharp and uninvited. Middle school choir winter recital. I had practiced for weeks, humming the songs under my breath while washing dishes. The night of the performance, I came down with a fever. Patricia stayed home with me for an hour, then left to make sure Megan and Rachel got to their parts on stage. My seat in the choir was left empty, my folder resting untouched on the stand. Even then, I had been the blank space, the gap no one bothered to fill. I stared at my phone, now feeling the same hollowness I had felt at 12 years old, only heavier. It wasn't a fever keeping me out this time, it was deliberate choice. I took a screenshot, then another. I opened a folder on my phone, titled it Proof, and tucked them inside. Some part of me knew they would try to rewrite the story later, pretend they had included me all along, claim I had overreacted. Having evidence, even just a collection of pixels, gave me something solid to hold on to. The chat kept buzzing. Megan posted a selfie in a boutique mirror, lace draped over her shoulders, the caption reading, "Finally found the dress." Hearts and comments exploded underneath. Patricia chimed in about flowers, Rachel about playlist requests. It was relentless, like being pelted with reminders that the celebration was moving forward, thriving without me. The sound of each vibration grated against my nerves. I set the phone down on the counter, walked to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water. But the screen lit up again, insistent, pulling at me like an open wound. I walked back, picked it up, and pressed my thumb against the chat name. The option appeared, mute. My finger hovered over it for a moment, my chest rising and falling. Then I chose mute for 1 full year. The silence that followed was startling. No more buzzing, no more constant tug. I placed the phone face down and listened to the absence of noise. The quiet spread through the cabin like a balm. But as the relief settled in, another feeling crept close behind: emptiness. The absence of their noise was both freedom and proof of how far I had been pushed out. They didn't need me, didn't even notice I wasn't answering. The family thread had become a stage, and I was not just cut from the play. I wasn't even in the theater anymore. I stepped outside onto the porch, the boards warm under my bare feet. The air smelled of cedar and grass. In the distance, hills rolled gently against the horizon, indifferent to weddings or group chats. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and clean, cutting through everything. I leaned against the railing and watched it glide, letting the steady silence anchor me. For so long, I had equated being near them with being part of something. But what I had been part of was not family. It was obligation, judgment, dismissal. Out here alone, I was beginning to understand the difference. Back inside, I brewed coffee, the cabin filling with the rich, earthy smell. I cradled the mug and sat by the window, staring at the hills as steam curled into the air. My phone lay dark on the counter. For once, I didn't feel the pull to check it. The chatter of Team Wedding 2023 would continue without me. Plans would be made, photos shared, jokes exchanged, but I had drawn a line. I would not sit in silence watching myself disappear. The quiet in Wimberly was not empty. It was mine. And as I sat there sipping coffee, I knew with absolute certainty that stepping out of their circle was not loss. It was survival. The sky over the hills had gone deep indigo, and the cabin windows reflected my own face back at me as I rinsed out my coffee mug. I thought the night would pass quietly, that maybe I could stretch the calm into the morning, but my phone buzzed against the wood counter. Rachel's name lit the screen like a warning flare. I let it ring once, twice. Part of me hoped it would stop, but the vibration kept pulsing through the silence until I finally picked it up. Her voice hit me before I could even say hello. "Claire, I need you to watch the kids tomorrow." It wasn't a question, it was an order. She sounded harried, as if she were talking to a babysitter she had already paid. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge to keep steady. "You called me at midnight to tell me that, yes, because this is urgent. Megan has enough to worry about, and Mom will be busy greeting people. You're the obvious choice." The words stung not because they were harsh, but because they reduced me to a utility, a spare part. The obvious choice. I could almost hear her shrug when she said it. "I can't, Rachel." Her end went quiet for half a beat before she snapped back. "Can't? What do you mean you can't? Tomorrow is the wedding. It's not about you, Claire. It's about family." I held my breath, then let it out slow. "I have my own plans." Her laugh was sharp, ugly. "What plans could you possibly have that matter more than this? Don't be ridiculous." I stared out the window at the silhouette of the cypress trees unmoving against the silver moon. "My plans are mine," I said, keeping my voice even. "I am not watching your kids." Her anger rose like a tide. "God, you're impossible. This family bends over backward for each other, and you never lift a finger. Do you even hear yourself? Megan deserves better than a sister who can't show up when it counts." I closed my eyes. Her words, once poison, now felt hollow, as if they no longer fit inside me. "I have shown up," I answered softly. "Too many times." She hissed through her teeth. "You're selfish, Claire. Cold. No wonder you don't have anyone of your own. That's why you're always alone." That jab landed, but it didn't destroy me. I thought of years spent cleaning up their messes, rearranging my life to fill their gaps. The times I had canceled vacations, skipped dates, lost sleep, all because they said family comes first. And what had it ever cost them to say the same to me? I spoke carefully, each word deliberate. "I am not selfish. I am finished being used." On the other end of the line, Rachel's breath came harsh and uneven. "You'll regret this," she spat. "When everyone sees tomorrow what kind of sister you are, you'll regret it." Her fury lingered in the silence after I hung up. My hand stayed steady. I set the phone face down on the table, the screen still glowing faintly against the wood. For a while, I just stood there listening to the night outside. The crickets were relentless, the breeze whispering through the leaves. The world was alive, but it asked nothing from me. That contrast struck me harder than Rachel's words. The quiet was honest. I walked to the small desk in the corner and opened my planner. The page for tomorrow was blank, a white square waiting to be claimed. I clicked my pen and wrote with slow precision the 12th of August, freedom. The ink bled slightly into the paper. I underlined the word once, then twice, until it was bold, undeniable. Closing the planner, I felt a strange surge of strength. They could gossip, they could sneer, they could whisper my name like an insult in crowded rooms, but none of it would force me back into a role I had never agreed to play. The lamp cast a pool of warm light across the room as I blew it out, leaving only moonlight to sketch the outlines of the furniture. My phone stayed silent, though I imagined more calls would come. Let them. For the first time in years, I would not answer. I slipped into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. My chest rose and fell steady, unhurried. I had not pleaded. I had not apologized. I had drawn a line, and I had stayed on my side of it. Outside, the night wrapped the cabin in its own kind of embrace, one built not on obligation, but on peace. Tomorrow would come, whether I showed up for them or not, and for once I was ready to let it arrive without me. The morning sun rose sharp and bright over the hill country, cutting through the mist that clung to the cedar trees. I packed slowly, folding my sweater into the overnight bag and zipping it shut with deliberate care. I had promised myself I would not go back, not step into their orbit again, but something inside me shifted as I stared at my reflection in the cabin's small mirror. My face looked calm, not timid, and for the first time in years I realized I wanted them to see that. I slid into the olive green dress that had hung untouched in my closet for months. It was simple sleeveless with a clean line that fell just below my knees. Not flashy, not meant to compete with a bride, but unmistakably present. I paired it with flats and a leather clutch. No pearls, no diamonds, nothing borrowed or blue. Just me. The drive from Wimberly to Dripping Springs was short, the kind that barely gives you enough time to change your mind. My fingers rested loosely on the steering wheel as the road curved past vineyards and ranch gates. The signs for event centers began to appear, each more elaborate than the last, until I turned into the long driveway of the chosen venue. White stone walls framed with ivy chandeliers visible through the tall windows, valet attendants in black jackets ushering cars into neat rows. It was a world crafted to impress. I parked at the far end and sat for a moment, listening to the muffled thrum of music spilling from the hall. My heart beat faster than I wanted to admit, but my hand was steady when I opened the door. The air smelled faintly of roses and dust, the scent of Texas summer weddings. Inside, the space glowed with candlelight bouncing off crystal glasses. Guests mingled in clusters, sequins, and silk catching the light. Conversations floated, laughter burst, and everywhere I looked was a familiar face I had known my whole life. And yet the moment I stepped into view, the chatter faltered. It was like the music had dropped an octave. Heads turned. A woman in a blush dress whispered to her husband. My cousin Matthew froze mid-sip. At the center of the room, my mother's smile stiffened. Her champagne flute paused just below her lips. Megan, radiant in her lace gown, blinked once and then twice, her jaw tightening as if she had bitten down on a seed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Aunt Linda broke away from the crowd. She was tall and still elegant, at 58, her silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. Her stride was purposeful, not rushed, but determined, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She wrapped her arms around me before I could say a word. The scent of her perfume, faint lavender, filled the space between us. Her voice was low, meant only for me. You could not be absent from this day, Claire. Whatever else they say, you cannot be erased. I swallowed hard, grateful and startled all at once. My hands tightened around her arms before I let go. Across the room, Megan's eyes darkened. Rachel stood close to her, leaning in to whisper, and both of them looked away, their faces arranged in polite masks for the crowd. My mother recovered her smile and began clapping lightly as if to redirect attention, but the damage was done. People had seen. They had seen me. I kept my posture tall, my steps measured as Linda guided me toward a table near the back. Head swiveled, then shifted away, pretending not to stare. The room buzzed again, but I felt every flicker of attention like static against my skin. Linda leaned closer as we sat. You wear that color well. Strong, steady. Olive has always been yours. I managed a smile, though. My throat was tight. Thank you for saying that. She patted my hand. Don't thank me, Claire. Just sit, watch, and let them be the ones unsettled tonight. From my seat, I watched as bridesmaids in pale pink fluttered around Megan, arranging her veil, carrying champagne, laughing too loudly. My father moved between tables, shaking hands, his voice booming with forced cheer. Patricia stood near the head table, directing servers with the authority of someone who believed she owned the place. Not once did their eyes meet mine directly, though I could feel the weight of their awareness pressing down. They had planned a perfect image, a stage where I was absent, and now I had walked across it without their permission. The music swelled, and the officiant's voice began to call guests to their seats. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, letting the hum of anticipation roll over me. My dress brushed softly against my knees, the fabric cool and grounding. I had entered their carefully curated world, not to disrupt with noise, but to exist undeniable. And as the ceremony began, the question lingered heavy in the air, unspoken yet electric. How would they treat me in front of everyone when pretending I did not exist was no longer an option? The ceremony ended in a wave of applause and clinking glasses, and guests began flowing toward the reception hall. The evening sun poured through tall windows, casting the place in a golden glow as if the world itself wanted to honor the day. The venue staff opened the doors to reveal round tables covered in ivory linens, polished silverware lined up with mathematical precision, centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus spilling out of crystal vases. I followed the crowd, my pace, even my expression carefully composed. At the entrance stood the seating chart printed on heavy cream paper and mounted in a gilded frame. It was arranged like a piece of art, the names grouped in neat clusters under table numbers, everything designed to look effortless and perfect. Guests leaned in close fingers, skimming the glass as they found their names, their faces brightening when they did. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, the chatter around me dipping just slightly. My eyes scanned the lists methodically, starting from the top left, then down, then across. Harper, Dalton, cousins from Houston, neighbors from their church, Ethan's colleagues, bridesmaids, and their dates. I searched twice, then a third time. Each pass only confirmed what I already suspected. My name was missing. A hush spread, subtle but sharp. The couple behind me whispered, their voices low, but not low enough. Is she not on there? Did they forget her? Another guest's eyes flicked to mine, then darted away with embarrassment. I felt the weight of it pressing against my ribs, the old sting of being left out, but this time it did not crush me. I straightened, letting my hand rest on the edge of the frame. My breathing was steady, and I could feel dozens of eyes waiting to see if I would falter. Ethan appeared near the chart, his laughter with a groomsman fading when he caught sight of me. His brow tightened as he glanced at the board, then back to me, then toward Megan across the room. She was radiant in her gown, surrounded by bridesmaids in matching pink chiffon, her voice carrying above the music. But when Ethan leaned toward her and murmured something, the smile froze on her face, faltered, and then returned too quickly. A flush crept up her neck. I let the silence hold a moment longer, then spoke clearly enough for the small crowd around the chart to hear. It looks like I wasn't placed at a table. That's fine, I'll find my own spot. My voice was calm, my smile polite. There was no accusation, only composure, and somehow that landed harder than if I had raised my voice. The air shifted. A few guests exchanged glances. Someone's fork clattered against a plate across the room. Patricia stiffened near the head table, her lips pressed tight, her hands folded too neatly in her lap. I stepped away from the display and walked deeper into the hall, scanning the rows of tables as if I had every right to choose. And I did. Near the back, by a pair of French doors that opened onto a stone patio lined with lanterns, I spotted a smaller table set for 6. Only 3 seats were filled, an older couple I vaguely recognized from Ethan's side and a middle-aged man with kind eyes. They looked up as I approached, curiosity in their faces, but no judgment. Mind if I sit here? I asked softly. Of course, the woman said, quickly pulling out a chair. Please join us. I slid into the seat, smoothing the skirt of my olive dress, my back straight. Relief flickered across their faces as though they were glad to have me. I thanked them, quietly lifted the glass of water in front of me, and let the hum of conversation settle back into place. But across the room the disturbance remained. I could see Megan laughing louder, tossing her hair as though nothing were amiss. Ethan, though, was less convincing. His gaze kept drifting toward me, his mouth tightening each time. The perfect image of their wedding reception had already been cracked, and I had done it with nothing more than calm presence. As the servers poured wine and brought the first course, I engaged politely with the couple beside me, asking where they had traveled from, complimenting their attire. My voice was light, my smile genuine, but under the table my hand rested firm against my thigh, steadying myself. I could feel the undercurrent in the room, like a second heartbeat. The music rose, soft jazz threading through the air. Crystal glasses clinked as toasts began at the head table. I lifted mine when others did, my face serene, my body language unbothered. I had taken what should have been my humiliation and turned it into their discomfort. They had to watch me seated, conversing, included by strangers, if not by blood. When dessert menus were set down, I caught Patricia's eyes across the room. She looked away quickly, her jaw rigid. Megan did not look at me at all, though I felt the heat of her awareness the way someone feels a storm brewing before it breaks. I had been erased from the chart, but I had not vanished. I had written myself back into the scene simply by sitting down. And now the weight of that absence, their deliberate exclusion, was no longer mine to carry. It was theirs. The lights dimmed as servers cleared away dessert plates, and the murmur of conversation shifted into anticipation. A screen at the far end of the hall flickered to life, framed with twinkling fairy lights and flanked by tall arrangements of hydrangeas. The DJ announced the slideshow, a tribute to Megan, a visual journey from childhood to her wedding day. Guests turned in their chairs, their faces tilted toward the glowing images. The first photo appeared Megan at 4 years old in a tutu, grinning with missing teeth. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Then Megan in middle school holding up a science fair ribbon. Applause followed. The next images showed her prom night, then college graduation, each one curated to capture her brightest moments. Her life edited into perfection, cast across a wide screen for everyone to admire. I sat quietly, my glass of wine untouched, watching frame after frame. Megan blowing out birthday candles, Megan at the beach, Megan holding Rachel's baby at the hospital. The applause grew louder with each image, as if the slideshow were confirming what the family had always insisted, that she was the center, the golden thread. Then the transition slowed. The music shifted softer now, less triumphant. The next image filled the screen, and a ripple of confusion passed through the room. It was me. I recognized it instantly. I was standing on the porch of the cabin in Wimberly, the sun low behind me, a mug of coffee in my hand. My hair was loose, my dress simple, my face unguarded in a way I had not seen in years. Underneath, a caption glowed in scripted font. "Family isn't complete without everyone." The silence hit like a stone dropped in water. Conversations stuttered, then stopped. I heard a sharp intake of breath from someone near the front. A whisper traveled along the table closest to mine. Megan's smile collapsed in real time, her cheeks flushed red beneath the chandelier light. Patricia, seated beside her, froze, with her hand half raised to her glass. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I did not move. My body was still, but my pulse thrummed in my throat. I felt dozens of eyes shift toward me, then away again, as if afraid to linger too long on the one person the family had tried so hard to erase. Across the room, I saw Blake. He was leaning against a column near the back, arms folded loosely across his chest. When my eyes found his, he gave the smallest nod, subtle and steady. It was enough. He had done it. The slideshow moved on, but the rhythm was broken. More pictures of Megan followed, but the audience was restless now. Murmurs rippled across the room. Someone at the next table whispered, "Isn't that her sister?" Someone else said, "I thought she wasn't here." Each word was a tiny fracture in the polished image Megan had tried to project. I lifted my glass, finally not to drink, but to steady my hand and let my eyes drift across the hall. Ethan looked unsettled, his mouth tight, as he glanced between Megan and Patricia. The bridesmaids whispered urgently, their shoulders pressed close. Megan tried to laugh again, louder than before, but the sound rang false, hollow against the screen still glowing behind her. Another photo of me flashed briefly, this one, from years ago at a family barbecue. I was laughing at something out of frame, my face sunlit, Rachel's kids running in the background. It wasn't staged, it wasn't curated. It was real. And it cut through the glossy reel like truth always does. My chest rose and fell slowly, each breath deliberate. For once I did not feel like a ghost haunting the edges of my family's story. I was visible, undeniable, projected larger than life for everyone to see. Patricia finally leaned in toward Megan, whispering urgently, her eyes darting toward me as though I were responsible for the betrayal. Megan's jaw clenched, her knuckles white against the linen of the tablecloth. She shot a glare in Blake's direction, but he had already shifted his stance, his face smooth, unreadable. I set my glass down gently and folded my hands in my lap. The weight of humiliation had shifted again, but this time it did not fall on me. It hung heavy over them, over the ones who had built an image of family that excluded me, only to have that image cracked open in front of 200 guests. The slideshow ended with a final photo of Megan and Ethan together, smiling against a sunset, but the applause that followed was scattered, hesitant, not the thunderous approval she had expected. I stayed seated, my expression calm, almost serene. For the first time that evening, I did not have to say a word. The room had already spoken for me. The night air outside the venue was cooler than I expected, carrying the faint hum of crickets over the hill country fields. I walked across the gravel lot, heels in hand, dress hem brushing the dust. Behind me, the celebration pressed on, muffled by the walls, but I had no desire to stay and witness the rest. I had seen enough. My car was waiting like a lifeline, and when I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, silence wrapped me in something that felt like victory. I drove back toward Austin with the windows down, the lights of the highway stretching ahead, each mile carrying me farther from the weight of their expectations. I reached my apartment just past midnight. The city felt alive, but not overwhelming. Neon signs flickering in East Austin, the streets still humming with late-night energy. My phone buzzed on the counter when I set down my keys. Dozens of missed calls. Patricia. Rachel. Even a couple from Megan. I turned the screen face down and left it there. I had no interest in hearing what they had to say. Not tonight. The next morning, the sun poured through the blinds, soft and golden, catching on the canvas prints. I had leaned against the wall, waiting for their moment. I had planned this day for weeks, quietly, secretly, while the rest of my family obsessed over seating charts and floral arrangements. Today was my beginning. My photography studio, tucked in a modest brick building off Cesar Chavez Street, was ready to open its doors. I dressed simply, jeans and a white blouse, the kind of outfit that let me move freely with a camera slung around my neck. At the studio, fresh paint still scented the air, the walls adorned with my favorite shots, landscapes of Texas backroads, portraits of couples caught laughing, sunlight spilling through trees. I arranged a small vase of flowers on the reception desk, pale roses with eucalyptus, a gift that had arrived earlier that morning. The card was signed by Renee, my mentor from my first photography job. Her words were brief but powerful. "You did it." I smiled as I tucked the card into my notebook. By 10 o'clock, a few people began to trickle in. Neighbors, curious passers-by, old friends who had watched me build this dream from the ground up. Clara came too, her smile warm, carrying a box of pastries from a bakery nearby. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that said she understood everything without needing to ask. We set the pastries on the counter and laughter filled the space as the room slowly buzzed with conversation. For the first time in a long while, I was surrounded not by obligation but by choice, people who came because they wanted to, not because tradition demanded it. My camera felt alive in my hands again. I snapped a photo of Clara laughing by the window, Renee's flowers catching the light behind her. I took another of two strangers holding their coffee cups, leaning in to admire one of my framed prints. This was the family I chose, the one I built picture by picture. Later that afternoon, as the studio quieted, I checked my phone out of habit. A headline caught my eye. Local whispers about Megan's wedding had already begun to circulate. Guests had noticed the tension, the awkwardness, the silence that fell when my image had appeared on the screen. It seemed Ethan's family had questions too, questions that Megan could not answer cleanly. Blake's choice had peeled back the curtain, and now the polished facade was fractured. Megan's reputation had taken a hit she could not spin away. I leaned back in my chair, letting that reality settle. I had not shouted. I had not thrown wine or slammed doors. I had simply existed, visible and unashamed, and that had been enough to unravel the illusion they built. Ethan would look at her differently now, with doubt flickering where pride once sat. Patricia would carry the weight of having watched her silence exposed in front of strangers. The punishment was theirs to live with, not mine to deliver. Evening came quietly. The last guest left, and I locked the front door, turning the sign to closed. I stood for a moment in the middle of the studio, the walls glowing in the last light of day. This was mine. My space, my work, my future. No one could erase me here. No one could strike my name from the list or crop me out of the picture. I thought about the years I had bent myself into their frame, small enough to fit, quiet enough not to disturb. But sitting there now, the truth felt clearer than ever. The greatest revenge was not forcing my way back into their picture. It was building a frame of my own, one so steady, so undeniable that theirs no longer mattered. Sometimes the loudest answer is silence. Sometimes the most lasting defiance is joy. And sometimes the greatest act of survival is walking away to create something that belongs only to you. So, I ask you, have you ever been treated as if you were invisible in your own family? Have you ever carried the sting of being pushed aside only to find strength in building your own path? Share your story with me in the comments because you are not alone. And if you want to hear more stories of breaking free of finding power where others tried to erase it, subscribe and stay with me. There are more frames to fill and more truths to tell.